Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maximé, and welcome to Inside Out. This is the show where therapists talk to therapists about therapy. And in the era of Black Lives Matter and COVID, what we're really talking about a lot about is anti-racism, how to become an embodied anti-racist therapist. And what does that entail? What does it even mean? Is it even anything that I considered before? Do I really think about what my own identity is in relationship to the people who are sitting on the couch, if you will, with me or across from me? And do I really have a good sense of what it is that is happening at a macro level, as well as whatever's happening at a micro level in terms of, okay, there's a relationship issue that someone's having, or okay, there's a financial issue that someone's having. But what about what's happening at a macro level and how that influences how we are? Today, I have a very special guest. NATASHA, Stovall, my co host, is away this week, but today I have a special guest, therapist Lynns. She is a therapist in New York City, and our topic is Asian American identity in the era of Black Lives Matter, considerations for therapists, solidarity in the moment, and what gets in the way of that solidarity. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today on Inside Out. It's great to see you.
It's good to be here and scary, but good.
Yeah, scary. Tell me about the scary part. Scary because
Scary because I guess this is a good place to start. Scary because, me being an Asian American, I'm not wired to speak out. Uh, I'm not taught to speak loud or be verbose about anything that I'm going through. And so having to do this in front of an audience is frightening.
yeah. Well, I just want to really commend you for on multiple levels for your willingness and your, sort of interest in kind of leaning in. Because I think what we're finding in general is that anytime we're talking about race, it's often a charged conversation or an uncomfortable conversation or a conversation that can bring up a lot of stuff for folks, and that's okay. And what I also hear you saying is that as an Asian American therapist, perhaps culturally, there are also some additional pieces where speaking out and sort of, being more in the public like this is kind of countercultural. And so also, that's your growing edge there. So again, like, I just want also people to realize, like, as therapists, we're people too. And so we're also, working with frames and boundaries and things like that, but we're also humans. And so we are on the path. And this is an invitation to being a committed anti-racist. So just to do a couple things, to start off, I want to just let people know where I'm standing. I am here on Nipmuc land. I'm currently in Massachusetts, but I'm a licensed therapist in New York City, in New York. And I am Haitian and Dominican, Italian and American. And I have a lot of privilege in terms of my social location. I have master's level degrees, Ivy, League, whatever degrees. I have a middle class, background and educated family. I grew up with a lot of light skinned privilege or sort of white-ish privilege, even though I'm a multi-ethnic woman. And, this has also been a path for me in terms of coming into what it is to be fully anti-racist. And I thought that being non-racist also was sufficient, but I didn't really realize the degree to which the conditioning can affect us over time. And so my first language is English. I was born in Chicago. I was born here in the United States, even though my, father was not. And, just to sort of like set the stage for the frame that I bring in and my awareness of that, and also my awareness of what, we are along, the path here. And so maybe Lynn, just starting with where you are on that a little bit about your social location, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about that.
Sure thing. I'm a Korean American, and those of you, I'm born to an immigrant. I'm an immigrant child of a Korean American parents who are also very religious. They're pastors, and so I bring that also. It's a very different worldview. So I immigrated to America when I was 6, and I had to learn a brand new language. Now, so much that I've kind of don't have a mother tongue. Like it's like kind of like needed this or that. Grew up very lower class middle, very, very hard to kind of settle in roots. But now kind of middle class average. And I do have the privilege of being light skinned. And also I'll talk more in detail later, but I do have the privilege of unconsciously like a whole community that try to be white and were successful at it in most parts. Yeah, but also struggled with, but no matter how much I try, I'm not. Right. And so living with that tension was a thing. I lived in New York City my whole life. And I think that's also a privilege, like not being othered as much. growing up in a very Korean American community within, Flushing, Queens, where everything, you didn't have, my mom and dad still don't really speak fluent English. And so that is also a big part of my story. And my culture is very shaped by the church that I went to, the Korean American church, not even like just Protestant American, but on top of that, there's like this Asian American immigrant church where the whole life revolves around that. And if you think back to it, it's very linked with who brought the Korean, their religion. It was the white missionaries.
Yeah,
Right.
interesting. Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, and so just again, like so much there but I appreciate again the disclosure around just like, hey, this is who I am, where I've been. I'm obviously a
Yeah.
process, as I'm living, I'm a living process,
Yeah.
right? And that we're here and that we're cool to keep on evolving. So I really appreciate all that. Um, you know, we were starting to talk a little bit about this, that it's not easy to, talk about race. And there's a lot of challenges around the issue in general, racism, institutionalized racism, systemic racism. You talked
Mhm.
about the missionaries, which obviously, the whole United States, I mean, and a big nod to Black and Indigenous people of color, Indigenous
Mhm.
people, although many are still here in the United States, that this is the land that we took over as an imperialist colonist, white,
Right.
centered, Eurocentric,
Mhm.
and that anybody who's here is here with that as a base, right? And is
Mhm.
here
Mhm.
with the base of enslaved and kidnapped people and Black African Americans, Black Americans now, right?
Mhm.
As a base of labor and as a base of every horrendous thing you could think of
Right.
when it comes to not being counted as fully human and all of these things that we see manifesting today in a variety of ways, including the school to prison pipeline and the ways in
Mhm.
which we see
Mhm.
the need for the protests like Black Lives Matter. But let's pause that piece for a moment and let's come back to this piece around how it's difficult as an Asian American therapist to talk about things like race based on some of the things that you started by saying, like culturally, what comes up um, for you.
Culturally, the things that come up is, first of all, like don't rock the boat kind of thing. I was taught like, hey, like if it's like somebody's fighting, like if it's not your fight, first of all, don't butt in. Right. We're not taught to like stand up for one another. I mean, we're taught that in value, but in practicality, it's like stay out of, don't meddle. But also what also comes up is, my immigrant background where like it was a struggle itself to take care of our own people. And so like the circle was drawn very narrow because it was still about survival. It was still about like paying next month's rent, you know? And so we didn't feel empowered to be able to be like, oh, we can help others no matter what those other was, not even like
Right.
outside our family or, I mean, forget other races. We kind of just went, we like drew this kind of line and said, we barely have enough to keep us, like me and like my family, like well. And then it's my church or like, my extended family, my friends. And maybe we get to an awareness where we can kind of go, and maybe humankind or
Mm.
different races. But I think I just want to like acknowledge and validate, and that I come from a place where even my parents still are in this like, what do you call those? Like where horses wear this thing?
Blinders.
Yeah, yeah. Are they really called blinders?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, what a word, right? They literally put blinders on as a survival mechanism. So they
Mm.
don't look anywhere else. And they have this single goal of like surviving, of like paying next month's rent and maybe getting ourselves, like our next generation, like further along. And so me as a child that grew up in that system, I wasn't taught to like think too far out of our family structure, think too far out of our church, or
Yeah.
like the people that are around you that are struggling. And I was taught, hey, like even in the religion system, it's like, you know what, maybe not go out there, but take care of what you need to take care of now. like the people around you, those are your neighbors. And
Right.
so in a weird way, I was taught to like keep to myself and just do me well.
Right, right, right. No, I love what you're saying because it points to a couple of things from the, where I'm sitting, not only as a therapist, but as a mindfulness instructor, and also
Mhm.
as someone who's kind of studying the neuroscience and the, physiology of the nervous system and stuff is, the survival mechanisms, the whole
Yes.
idea of like, first put on your own oxygen mask. And so as an immigrant,
Mhm.
of course, that's going to be, there's going to be a lot there that you're going to have to do in terms of, class, your economic status, and you're earning
Yes.
the money. You're sort of, you're trying to,
Yeah.
like you say, pay the rent. And all of that is very real, as well as the idea of feeling like all the energy, all the everything has to go into that basket, the blinders, so to speak. From the non-dual perspective, from the mindfulness perspective, and from the metacognitive awareness or the mentalizing or the whatever perspective, we would say, okay, so could there be a both and? Can I recognize that there's a need to pay my rent? And there's also, as you say, this piece around common humanity, where
Mhm.
regardless of whatever the skin color, economic status, or ability, or whatever it is, that we're all part of this. And so it's a both
Yeah.
and. Yes, I'm unique. And yes, I have
Mhm.
this particular circumstance, and these are things I need to take care of, raising my family, paying my rent.
Mhm.
And that also isn't necessarily licensed to be so embedded in
Absolutely.
the mentality of exclusion, right? Or the
Right.
tribalism or the
Mhm.
division. So that
Right.
there can be a little bit more of a both and when we have that awareness, which is something that I think is even evolving as we speak, right?
Mhm, mhm. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, if I'm allowed, I would love to
Yeah.
share that story.
Yeah.
Francesca and I had a "What are we going to talk about?" kind of talk before this, and I found myself reiterating all of the beliefs that even I was uncomfortable with, but I tried my best to just kind of reiterate, "Well, this is what I'm hearing from my Asian clients."
And can you give us a couple examples?
Um, ugh, like even just thinking about it, sometimes it just makes me. But I practice real hard to like not make faces or not, to create safe
To
places
be
for
neutral.
everybody. Yeah, to be neutral. And so this is exactly the conversation I had in a very neutral as possible state, which was, some people think that uh this whole like that black people are like really just complaining, like they're the only race that like asks for handouts, when Asians, we work hard. Like if there's a problem, we work hard. And so they have resentment for that. And I was explaining to Francesca like how, and sometimes I myself, like as I have these conversations with my own family or my close friends, it's gets to a point where I like just like a switch just flicks in me and I got enough. Like I can't continuously, I can't change people's minds, and I just like shut off. Um, and some other like viewpoints might be like, oh, why make these stories about people like George Floyd? Why? I mean, if Martin Luther King was killed by the hands of cops, then whoa, yes, I would be marching too. But why a criminal like George Floyd? And uh, I, being a person that had to kind of create, yes, I understand, or like try to empathize with those people, I realized I myself have not done the work of going, well, what do I feel about this? And how do I
Mm,
verbalize this? And
mm.
so I ended up writing Francesca an email saying, yes, like, like shame also kicked my ass, you know,
It's fine. No,
it's
it's
okay.
the internet. You're fine.
Shame kicked my butt in the end. I had to do a lot of self processing. There was a lot of voices within it too, which kind of allowed me to look into the personal processing of how difficult this is, right? Like, oh, am I really that unaware of my own like yellow privilege that was borrowed on like, white privilege, built on the systems that, hello, and have I really enabled that as I'm listening and empathizing? Is neutrality like how does that work without endorsing, right? And a lot of shame about like, ooh, like that doesn't feel good.
Mm.
And using your words, Francesca's, maybe I am a little bit more racist than I thought too. And then it's like, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, obviously, like, hard to hear that people come in with those things, but they do, and we think them. And the whole purpose of mindfulness is watching the thoughts that are happening in your head and
Mm-hmm.
feeling like, okay, so mindfulness, if you're having a mindfulness practice, it's basically being noble and dignified, centered, I'm enough and I matter. I'm no worse or better than anyone else, right? And I'm aware of the um, thoughts and feelings and emotions that I'm having. And so the little thought bubbles that come up, like in a basic mindfulness practice, you may be,
Mm-hmm.
concentrating on following your breath or something. But the whole purpose isn't to check out and just like get into a Zen state. Although when you are
Mm-hmm.
able to stabilize the mind, you are able to then get more in touch with the heart, right? And the
Right.
reverberations of the piece about that's really the embodied compassionate piece. But
Mm-hmm.
the first part is watching the thought bubbles come and then recognizing if there's aversion or if there's like a grasping or some kind of like zoning out about it. So when the thought
Mm-hmm.
bubbles come up, it could be, oh, I want, a turkey sandwich for lunch, or it could be that like, I really like this person or I don't like this person at my job or whatever. Or it could be like, ew, like something racist or something prejudiced or something. And then we, in mindfulness practice, use that, oh, interesting. There's that
Mm-hmm.
thought there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. So that's a part of what's happening in my mind. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
gee, can I get curious about what might be the imprinting within me? Again,
Mm-hmm.
all breathing the air of white body supremacy culture,
Right.
all, in that. And then, can I get curious about that to lean in? So it's not to say I'm a terrible person, to your point about
Right.
shame, for
Right.
having that thought. It's to acknowledge and be with the thought and say, oh,
Right.
I have awareness that's with this thought. Or Dick Schwartz of Internal Family Systems says, it's
Right.
my racist part, the
Mm-hmm.
part of me that has learned or that has been conditioned to be racist,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or
Yeah.
have racist
Mm-hmm.
tendencies or habits or
Yeah.
patterns or thoughts. And that as long as I can be with that, then I can insert a place where I
Right.
can start doing some work. But if it's totally merged and fused, then we don't even want to look at it and we just want to push it away
Right.
because I'm not racist.
Right. And I think it's having that the self work. I mean, at least for me, is having compassion even on that. Right. What made me, instead of going ugh and just like checking out or
Yeah.
disconnecting from it, but just going, what's that about, self? Like, what's
Yeah.
your story? What's your narrative? And what were those? And at the end of the day, that's the part where I go, I empathize, and I have compassion for those that are, kind of unaware or ignorant or racist, even still. My family, you know, um, maybe it was a protective mechanism, and that's what really helps me create space for that curiosity.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, to use internal family systems, that there are these exiles and the protectors, right? And that there
Hmm.
are these, a lot of people are familiar with that model who are probably on the call that are therapists. And we try to exile the parts of us that feel
Right.
ashamed that, oh, I'm racist, I can't be racist or something. But then we also are trying to be mindful of the fact that there is um, a real part of us that can be with that wants to protect us and that we can be protected, but that we don't have to be protecting ourselves in the ways that we think that we had to,
Right. Right.
um
Right.
let me see here. The next thing, or partly more, we were going to talk about is anger is valid. It is okay. You say it's toward the way that the system has been created, not a specific individual. Can you talk a little bit about the role of anger or the role of um, sort of how you're feeling in relationship to, you know, learning all of this?
Yeah. And interestingly, I had to spend a lot of time on why am I so uncomfortable with this, right? Uh, and I can say I came to the conclusion of anger is valid, but I didn't start there. I
Mm-hmm.
started with a lot of discomfort of like, why are people so angry? Why can't we just have a peaceful conversation? Or, why do people have to be so reactive? And not to say anything about reactive, like or not, but I think also in general, it's one thing to I'm fully validating, like absolutely, the anger belongs, right? of to the people, it's righteous indignation of what has happened and what is currently all like repeating itself again and again and again. And like, I think for me now, the better question that I'm asking myself is, how do I join in the validation of anger, but then channel the energy to do something more constructive for the movement?
Mm, yeah.
Because it's a real thing. Like these conversations take so much energy, even out of me. Um, it's like we can't just like and fight and then we have like nothing left for the actual
Work.
movement. Yeah,
Yeah.
the actual work. And so I'm wondering, and the questions that I ask my clients and also me is, what can I do? How can I stand there and say this is wrong? Anger is just one of those emotions. Like again, with the internal family systems, it's just a piece of us that says something, a boundary has been crossed. We've been hurt and this needs to stop. It's a catalytic emotion. So it's really important to be there and
Hmm.
to validate that and say, yes, and we're angry with them. And how do we now channel this energy? And it's thinking about like where I'm coming from, I just wanted to acknowledge like Asian people are just not good with anger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think it's a women's thing too. I mean, like there's a black stereotype of like the angry black girl, but there's also a angry, like Asian girl too.
Mm,
Once you're married and you have no, like, your sensitivity to like what's appropriate is all lost, you're just like rash and, like, and you're angry, you're like, "Ah," and there's like a stereotype, like a prototype for that too.
right.
Right. And so we try not to be that, especially as a woman. We try to be this like dainty, and even if we're angry, we don't know how to. And this is how we are supposed to. Oh, like we're taught to express sorrow, hurt, wound, but not anger.
Yeah.
And so I think even just in my social standing, it was very difficult. Like, how do I even express this? And I needed to find a way for me, not just for the movement, but just like, what do I do with this? And it's very easy for me in my, as an Asian American, for me to feel so much of it, then I just like shut down.
Right, right, right. And I think the idea of the energy of anger being a life force energy and is something from like somatic experiencing, but also just in general, that it's a mobilizing energy, right? So healthy
Mm-hmm.
defense and healthy anger, that's mobilizing, that's elan, that's your elan vital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how that's different from being, identified as an angry person. That's different from saying that I am angry or being othered in a way where people are saying that you
Mm-hmm.
are angry. You can actually say, actually, to have the energy of anger here is a righteous social justice
Yes.
response to an injustice, an imbalance in the system. And so I can protest that, but
Right.
not be identified as an angry person. And as long as there's some distance there where I have that, then I'm able to be in relationship to it and with it, and then do as you say, not get stuck with the internalization of the anger around the
Right.
shame, or the externalization of the anger around what you just described as, for example, your clients were bringing into session and saying, oh, these people
Mm-hmm.
are the problem. But then moving toward that embodied compassionate anti-racism stance,
Yes.
which is,
Mm-hmm.
how do I be in solidarity with all of this, recognizing that culturally, we're
Absolutely.
not, this isn't the norm, but more is being asked of us now. And is that
Mm-hmm.
okay? And can I lean into my growing edge here?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to bring up that for me, I think I speak for a lot of Korean Americans too. Korean Americans have a big background on Christianity. Korea is a small country, but we have one of the world's biggest churches, right? And
Mm,
again, going back to how that religion itself was brought and even introduced to Koreans, right? After the war, like, missionaries who say, oh, God has, there's this gospel, there's this good news. And it was white men,
yeah.
white people that like held the light for us and saved us from the oppressors. And so I think there's an unconscious like striving to be that. And we kind of link what is godly, what is righteous with white.
Mm, mm,
And so those can't be, like, even as I'm talking about what it feels like to be Asian, I know so much of it is what it actually feels like to be an Asian American who was brought up in a very with religious
Right.
undertones.
Right. And I really want to emphasize that you're speaking, and that's why we did the social location piece at the beginning,
Yes.
as a Korean immigrant, Korean American woman
Yes.
therapist, but that, depending on when someone came, how long they've been
Hmm.
here, what
Yeah.
the languages are, what the social class is, Chinese Americans who've been here for, over a century, have a very different experience than,
Yep.
someone
Hmm.
who's here now. And
Correct.
Cambodians and Hmong and Vietnamese and Laotians and, uh, Japanese and, that's everyone is different, right? Not monolithic, just like Black
Hmm.
people have the diaspora and Southeast Asian, Bangladeshi,
Hmm.
Indian, Pakistani, right? And there's a lot of different cultural influences all around. So we're very much naming the fact that we're just painting with a very broad brush here for the purposes of a
Hmm.
conversation, and you're bringing into the parts of this that are unique to you as a woman,
Absolutely.
Korean
Yeah. Thank
American,
you
and a
for
therapist.
clarifying. Yes.
Yeah, and just so that people,
Yeah.
it's like it's not all, yeah, right. Like not everybody has the same experience, but this is just one portal to the conversation. I'm wondering if now might be a good time to maybe dip into that Hassan video a little bit and sort of share a little bit about what this means in terms of solidarity with Black Lives Matter, because we've talked a little bit about some of the barriers there, but I'm wondering if this might be a good place to kind of dip into that, because I think that some of what we've been talking about, maybe before we do that, we could, now that I'm correcting myself, maybe we could talk a little bit more about what you just said here, which is racism occurs in the deep subconscious level. Asian Americans' first go-to is the white perspective because it carries privilege, and Asians are
Hmm.
Black and white about where power lies. And you started to talk about this in terms of the
Hmm.
white godliness. Can you talk a little bit more about Asian Americans' first go-to is the white perspective?
Hmm. So to set up, I mean, our whole worldview is very hierarchical, and whether there's a God or not, there's always like somebody who's older than we bow. You know what I mean? We, even in the way that we call people, like older brother, there's like a specific word for it, but younger brother, no specific where you call them by their names,
Mm,
and so there's a whole like baked into the culture, this hierarchical system of just being and social just interacting. And within it, I think what Asians do is we often are very good at locating ourselves within, like when we first go into a situation, we kind of locate, like, oh, that's a pastor, or like, oh, that's a teacher, right? And so we know where the power is. And then we know how to submit and kind of like carry this like, oh yes, like kind of attitude and persona to the people in power. And we also know where to abuse it, right? And we know what to
right.
play towards. And I think it's so human nature, isn't it? Like to, if you're wherever you are, to gain power, to gain control, right? To work towards that. And for us, it's absolutely tied with whiteness. And so
Mm,
I think there's like this internal, like even survival thing, like to survive, to thrive, to be chosen and to be well and in power means being white.
yeah.
Um, and I don't think people would actually even be able to verbalize this yet, but it's so baked into the culture. And so, yes, it's a very human response. And I think this is why, there's a lot of like, even in Korea right now, current Korea right now is very Eurocentric. I mean, even like the amount of the standards of beauty,
Mm,
right? Like the round eyes, the tall nose, the body shapes, right? It's very, and the skin whitening products that have come on,
wow.
right? It's very Eurocentric, and I think it it just kind of plays on itself. Like this is just what we like, this is just like this is our preference, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of things go like left unsearched because it's our preference, right? Who's going to say anything to that? But if you think about it, it's like, why is that? Like, I do see a lot of like Korean or Asian women with white men, but
Mm,
I don't often see a Korean woman with a black man. Why
mm.
is that? And even if we bring home, like, we would never be like, I'm racist. It's just my, but think about that. Like, I think it's just one thing that I've just kind of thought about. what about my attraction, like my inherent attraction, what my go-to? Um, I just know for a fact, like if I were to bring home a white man, it's passable. It's
Yeah.
passable. But if I brought home a black man, ooh, like that's a really big disruption in the family system.
Mm.
And so I could say, like even in front of a therapist, I could say, I don't want to deal with that. But
Mm.
why don't I go deeper? What is it really about me, right? Why am I not dating black men? you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. And I think that's where the treasures lie, right? Like this like aha moments of like, oh shoot, like this is what that is. And instead of again not being like, ooh, but just wow, have I been racist, a little bit more racist than I thought I like to admit?
Yeah.
Maybe, you know.
Yeah, again, curious, open, and leaning in.
Mhm.
Like I think that when we think that we're fixed and rigid and we're only a certain way, we have to defend our identity by saying, I am not that. I am not this monster person. But when we're
Right.
sort of real about it and just say, yeah, I've been dating white men, not black men, and say, okay, what's up with that? I'm curious about that. I'm
Mhm.
noticing that now. And I'm curious about that. And when a client brings that in, who is Asian American of some ethnicity, right? That's something that now, because you've done your own internal process on that and you've done your own self-reflection on that, you have a greater facility to have
Right.
that conversation with them
To
in a
go
real way.
there. Go
Right.
there.
Right. Whereas what I'm saying, what I heard you say was before, you may not go there. You may just be like, oh yeah,
Cause I'm uncomfortable. I ain't taking you to somewhere I'm uncomfortable, But I can
right.
only take you where I've been, right? I can only be like navigate you through like planes and like, that I know of. And so I
Mm,
think this is why it's so important, whether you're working with an Asian American or whether you're an Asian American therapist, to do your own inner work, and as a therapist, just to create that space where curiosity can be nurtured because there's so much shame. I mean, Asian people are so heavily burdened with shame just to begin with. It's always this like, we're always taught to compare. Like our mothers would be like, oh, I heard this person's daughter was going to this school or making this money and this kind of job. That's great. And this passive aggressive way of like kind of always having to like vet ourselves against something else is
mm,
baked in as well. And so to undo that, and to create a space where an Asian American, person can come in and say, actually, I am really curious about that. And, like I am really ashamed about it. Even to like call that out is a huge, huge thing.
right, right. No, I so appreciate that. And that makes me think of, again, these are systems of oppression, right? So we're looking at structural issues and people perpetuate or keep into play systems of oppression, right?
Right.
Meaning that like it takes us, and so changing hearts and minds internally, that's why we're calling the show The Inside Out,
Mm.
can affect policy, structural changes. That's why having bodies there with the protests is so important and everything. But that idea of, really recognizing that there are structures here and getting into also the piece around like some people will say, well, we've all heard Black Lives Matter, oh, all lives matter, oh, blue
Mhm.
lives matter, oh, whatever it is. And one could also say, um, I heard someone say recently, as an Asian American woman, I feel invisible right now. I also have been
Mm,
done unto. I also am not in the majority as much as I try to be. And I feel like I don't have a place to speak here now about what
mm,
my
mm,
experience
mm,
is because all the emphasis is around Black Lives Matter.
mm,
And it's an interesting thing because, again, back to this, we're not in the
mhm.
trauma Olympics. We're not doing
Right.
comparisons. This is about, yes, you have that experience. Yes, there are Japanese internment camps. Yes, the Chinese built the railroads. Yes, we know that, things have, as current modern day, there's a whole host of ways in which nobody wins in this system of oppression of
Yeah.
white supremacy, except perhaps a few privileged white cis hetero men who, are able to sort of work that system toward the
Right, right,
one
right.
percenter, place, and that everything else, Dr. Carol Gilligan at NYU talks about, in patriarchy, of which white body supremacy is very much a part of in terms of it being hierarchical. In
Mhm.
patriarchy, you're always on that ladder. So you sacrifice relationships for relationship, meaning I am in relationship
Yes.
to you, either above or
Yes.
below, and I
Yes.
need to be here, not here.
Right.
And therefore, yeah.
So to that, what triggered in me was when you said like Asian women also feel very disempowered or invisible, right? So what do people do when they feel disempowered? They grapple for power.
Mm,
And what are the mechanisms and what are the underlying systematic, like subconscious systematic ways that we've grappled for power? To be white.
mm.
So you see how like it kind of like the more disempowered we feel, the more we want to be white.
Yeah, and I think that is so interesting. The more disempowered we feel, the more we want to be white. And that could be said
Right.
of other ethnicities also, right? But
Hmm.
particularly for what you're saying is Asian Americans.
Yes.
And I think, I guess the point about solidarity, about comradeship, about allyship, and about what we're sort of seeing, which is more of a multiracial movement in the protests, is nobody wins.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You will be the hamster on the treadmill forever. And it's not sustainable with this hierarchy. The planet is dying. Our families are fragmenting. We have all kinds of psychosomatic neuroses and all kinds of physical ailments. As we know, the ACE studies, the ACE scores, they
Mhm.
show up with physical, heart
Right.
disease and obesity. Like white body supremacy and racism for people of color and Black people and Indigenous people is, in fact, a pre-existing condition for so many of these
Absolutely.
other
Yes.
situations that happen, that manifest in different ways.
Right.
Could be
And I
narcissism, it
think,
could be high blood pressure, it could be whatever. Go
mhm.
ahead.
And and so another point that I wanted to bring up, silence, right? I was talking about this silence, how it's very empowering for Asians, right?
Mm,
Because we've used it as a coping mechanism. We've used it to kind of like spare our energies, and it's like let them fight. We're just like sharpening our knives, sending our kids to Harvard, and like what I mean, like
right.
yeah, just fight, and like that is the way that Asians have kind of functioned throughout society. Um, and while I want to just kind of say yes, and I want to empathize to it and validate that's a survival thing too, right? Like I don't have much to give, it's like we just have barely enough to like just pay attention to our own thing and go, 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 go. And so like these blinders again. So yes, it's an issue of survival. But I also want to point out, that it is also apathy,
Mm,
right? It's apathy. It really is. It really just takes so much for me to care. At the end of the day, if I don't care, then I don't care. I can
mm,
just go to my grocery shopping and just come home, feed my kids, rinse and repeat, and I can be well. I can until it doesn't hit me like this whole thing about like oh like like they're gonna come after you one day. It doesn't hit me because I'm in my own bubble. I've kept myself safe with these little blinders on.
yeah.
Um, but to remove those blinders to also it also means that there needs to be an awareness that it's not working for you now.
Right, right, right. No, I love what you're saying. Asian silence is not white silence. Yeah, we don't have the historical baggage with Black people that white people do. It's not silence that's denying what has happened. Our silence is a survival mechanism. Those were some of the points that you had there. So
Yeah.
let's maybe cue the video because this comedian is sort of talking about what gets in the way of the solidarity with Asian Americans and with Black Americans. And I
Mhm.
think, it was the 1965 Civil Rights Act that sort of paved the way for especially, a lot of Asians, and I know Southeast Asians especially, to come over. And there's a lot of, this idea of, like you mentioned, the model minority,
Mhm. Mhm.
meaning that, stay quiet, don't cause
Mhm.
waves, come with whatnot, degrees in education, work hard. I think on our
Right.
private conversation, you said an A minus is an F in,
Mhm. An Asian F.
yeah, an Asian F, right? And all of that, but sort of where this falls short. So let's cue the video and just see. And a little bit of a trigger warning here. It's about 3 weeks old, so it was something that has a couple of photos embedded in it of the situation with George Floyd,
Mhm.
and so if you're not interested in watching that, perhaps you can just listen.
Mhm.
Thanks, Brian. If you could cue that up, we'd appreciate it. And also prepare your questions for any listeners that are live and online now. Put them in the chat box.
This photo has haunted America this past week and is horrific, all too familiar. Another
Again, speaking
Black
with
person
therapist
dying at the
Lynn
hands of the
today.
police,
Asian American
screaming,
identity in
"I
the era
can't
of
breathe."
Black Lives Matter.
But this time we cannot stay silent, especially the Asian community, because the murder of George Floyd was so heinous Even these people are speaking out.
This man who put his knee on the neck of George Floyd does not deserve to be free in this country.
What happened to George Floyd sickened me, and I'm not the only American who feels this way.
It is not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist. And for those who do not think white privilege exists, you are fucking blind.
This is fucking incredible. It only took Logan Paul seeing 2 dead bodies on camera to reflect on his privilege.
We must hold our authorities accountable. Police officers, politicians, policymakers. As Killer Mike said, bully the politicians at the voting booth.
Believe it or not, this is progress. But Logan, if you're gonna talk seriously about racial injustice, fucking move Squirtle! He's like, we have to bully the politicians. We have to prosecute these murderers. We gotta catch them all. Dude, we're having a serious discussion and you got fucking tchotchkes on the table. Get the Beanie Babies out of here, Logan. Protests have erupted across the country. It is a mass mobilization unlike anything I have ever seen before. And a lot of cops have done nothing but make a heartbreaking situation worse. You've seen the videos on Twitter showing cops punching protesters.
Okay, so I think I was trying to show the other video that he did instead of this one, but they're both to the point about essentially what he's trying to say is that there's a piece around there being sort of a disconnect between being a minority, which is not a word that I like to use, but being an immigrant, being someone who is non-white in this country versus using that as a place for solidarity versus as a place for whatever gets in the way. So I'll see if we can pull up the other video. But in the meantime, I think you saw the original one, and he was sort of talking about the fact that there are a whole host of reasons as to why that is. And I don't know if you can elaborate on any of that, either off the video or just in general. Lynn, we're back on.
Great.
Yeah. So just the idea that, essentially this was the wrong video. It was the different one that was submitted. So meaning that I need to go back to the original one and hopefully we can pull it up. But the idea that there's a break, but there's a disconnect about the solidarity between Asians, Southeast Asians, perhaps Asians, and Black Americans. And can you talk a little bit about what might be necessary to bridge that? I mean, we have kind of been talking about that, but he uses some very specific examples.
Yeah, that's really, I think, to the core. I'll just use me as an example. So the word minority, as I'm even saying, like, oh yeah, I'm a minority. We come to this nation and we try to not be the minority, right? We try so hard not to be the minority. We try to be, make better lives and settle in, and we try to be an American citizen, which all is, then who is the American citizen? Who owns this country? Who has the power, right? Who calls this country a home? The whites, right? And so it's interesting how even as you're talking about that, I'm realizing the disconnect is I don't want to be a minority. That's why it's hard to stand in solidarity with minorities. I don't want to be disempowered. I don't want to be vulnerable. Why would I have to, I've worked so hard in my conscious mind not to be vulnerable, to be better off, to work up the social, ladder or whatever it is in this country. And then to say, hey, stand in solidarity. I think one of the disconnect is, you have to choose the vulnerability, right? And I think that is, for me personally, it's a spiritual discipline to choose vulnerability and to see the strength within the weakness, right?
That is such a great, beautiful way to say it. It's a spiritual discipline to choose vulnerability and to see the strength within the weakness. I just want to underscore that. Continue, please.
And so and I just want to say, like, to those religious people, I want you to understand that this is what the religion was supposed to be about. This is the guy, Jesus, standing up with people on the margins. And this is why it's hard, because it goes against everything that are just like regular human mechanisms is about, right? And when left to our own primitive brain mechanisms, we want to defend, we want to protect, we want to be in a comfortable place. We don't want to stand with those in the margins. It's very inconvenient.
Right. Even if
yeah.
that is what we are, it's just
Right.
that if there's some idea that, if there is some idea that I can access some kind of equity, some kind of wealth, some kind of
Yes.
power, right?
Yes.
That if, I want to align myself with that. And that's again why I want to just emphasize it's a structural issue. It's a systemic issue. There can be a world where people are not doled out having more or less power. The whole thing about centering whiteness or being in a white body supremacist society or in a racist society is that what's in the center is such a small number of the actual, Asian people are the largest people body of races, which we know is a construct, but of races in the world. There are more people of Asian descent than there are of Latinx or of European or of Black or whatever. So that number is huge, right? And so the whole idea that you're a minority is actually like false, but in the system of white body supremacy and racism as put forth in particularly American culture, it's about a disempowering piece.
Right.
Or your value is only limited to, as you say, your intellect, if you're an engineer, whatever it is, right?
Your
So like,
function or
correct.
Yeah.
And so this idea, I think we're sort of trying to get to this video, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I'd love to also bring in any questions, if anybody had any questions, to just, let people type them into the chat box or whatnot. You mentioned another point. Here's why it's important for Asian Americans to grasp this. We are all someone's other. It's not safe to be silent. The problem is not just a Black problem. We have to access survival and wellness in a different way. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Can you talk about how this plays out with your client sessions with white therapists versus with Asian therapists? Asian clients? White clients versus Asian clients?
Can you reword the question?
Yeah,
how this plays out?
Yeah, you were just saying that essentially it's important for Asian Americans to grasp that we're all someone's other. It's not safe to be silent. Basically, how do you talk about this with white clients in session and with Asian clients in session?
It's funny. White clients don't bring it into session as much as Asian or minority clients do, right? They don't need to talk about it, and that is their privilege sometimes, right? I think what I was trying to hone in there with this is why it's so important for Asian Americans to grasp this is our coping mechanism, our survival, and it's a damn good one of this like silence and the blinders, right? We need to realize that it's not serving us anymore, or we will never do the work of putting it down and finding new ways to cope and to defend and to be well, right? And that's where the disconnect is. I think in some very sheltered ways, Asian Americans still feel like it works for them. And they don't see a side of that. This is why they're internally resisting like dropping that. I don't want to drop it, because it makes me uncomfortable. It's going to be inconvenient, and it's not my cause. We're fine. Right. So that's why I just started to think, okay, we are always somebody's other. Who are we kidding? I've heard countless stories of, Asian clients. I said, I try to be white, but then you know what, who am I? Look in the mirror. How white am I going to be? Look at my body, or look at my culture, look at my family. How white am I going to be? And then there's like a split. And we have to understand, and I think maybe with COVID, right, being the Kung flu and, all of that stuff coming out, we kind of have a taste. And even then, we don't say anything because we got blinders on.
Well, I think that's so interesting because with COVID, there was like a lot of my Asian clients were feeling like there was physical threat. I mean, there was obviously like people in the street throwing acid in people's faces, that were Asian American. There were really physical threats that were happening with quote unquote, as you say, Chinese flu or whatever was being said by political forces that frankly, I don't think is very helpful to the well-being of anyone to make statements like that. And so what is it about people who want to continue to have the blinders on or stay inside? And how do you, meaning literally quite, you're supposed to be sheltering at home. So it's kind of
I know.
As opposed to speaking out or moving into solidarity.
And I think this is why I'm saying, we'll try something different because right now, I hope that Asian Americans don't wait for them to be personally othered in order to like wake up to the fact that this is a reality. Right. We're always going to be somebody's other. And so I think just exposure, and how do you fight apathy? I think that's the question you're asking me, right? How do you fight apathy? I think this is why, personal relationships, personal invested relationship with like, I know a Black friend, I have a Hispanic friend, and they're dear to me, not to use them as tokens, but, just like there has to be an experiential, like, actually, I'm more connected with this person. And if this person goes through that, then it's also on me too.
Right. Yeah, beautiful. So we have a few minutes left and I don't see any questions yet unless Brian has any. So let's cue the video. I think we found the right video of Hassan. And so let's just see if we can play that. I think it's 12 minutes. We'll see if we get through some of it or most of it. I don't know. We're almost wrapped up with the show.
Look, I can't speak to what it's like to be Black.
This has been a great conversation. Lynn,
I know how we
in New
talk
York
about
City.
Black people.
And again, just talking about
because it is a microcosm of America.
Bring up
Asians,
these uncomfortable conversations in session, but leaning into your growing edge and some of the things that you can do, even to understand the history, even to understand.
We spent the last 5
taking
weeks
anti-racism
praying at the altar of Michael Jordan. How could we be afraid?
Here we go.
We love Black America. Yeah, on screen. In our living rooms. But if a Black man walks into your living room or wants to date, God forbid, marry your daughter, you call the cops. Dude, do you know what we call Black people? We call them kala. It means black, not in a good way. If someone in your family is dark-skinned, we clown them. We call them kallu. Look at kallu. Our Bollywood stars do skin whitening commercials so we don't look black. Thank you, Britain. It is bad to be Black in Desi culture, even though we all wish we were Black. You don't think that affects how we view Black people? 20% of Muslims in America are Black. We don't even like praying at the same mosques. If they show up at the masjid, we're like, yo, is Farrakhan here? That is the great hypocrisy. We love seeing how high a Black person can ascend in America, but we have done nothing to raise the floor. That is what these protests are about. And the worst part is, we're in this country because of protest, because of the civil rights movement. The only reason so many of us are here is because of the Immigration Act of 65. That law rode the wave of the Civil Rights Act of 64. Think of the chess moves. Martin gets Lyndon B. Johnson to sign that sheet of paper, and little do we know, MLK CC'd us on that email of progress. Because of that one signature, me and Abu were able to move to Edison, Fremont, Plano, Naperville, Irvine, Marietta, Dearborn, Twin Cities, Schaumburg, Sugarland, Long Beach, Dallas, Sunnyvale, Cupertino. You know, the factories that make us. Also that you could eat fucking Bandu Khan instead of being in Karachi. But hey, it's not our fight, right? This is a black-white issue. America's story didn't start when we got here. When you became an American citizen, you don't just get to own the country's excellence. You have to own its failures. That is the deal. That's why I can't get this photo out of my head. Because it's cropped wrong. Zoom out. Who's in this photo? The officer who's blocking people off, he's Hmong American. He's my age. He's 34. The guy who owns the store, did you know this? He's Arab American. His clerk called the cops on Floyd. That is America. A Black man was murdered in cold blood and we were on the fucking sidelines watching. I'm not saying we were the ones who killed George Floyd, but we have to be the ones who pull that cop off his neck. We think we're not a part of the story, but we're at the scene of the crime. That's why the full picture matters. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a system. Fine, Hassan, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to support Black America? I did the little Black Instagram square. I had the tough conversation with my family. Fuck that. This fake woke shit we do on IG dies in a week. We can't just knock out racism. We have to help win this thing on the cards. We have to donate our money and time to Black organizations, to all the doctors, offer free healthcare to protesters, tech people, help Black businesses get online. You work in IT, set up a router. You pass the bar? Good. Ami and Abu are proud. Work pro bono for protesters. Pfizer doesn't need any more billables. Everything helps. Be like Rahul. He let protesters hide from police in his home. You don't even need a degree to do this. You just need a Sharpie, because we have got to get our civics, law school nerd shit on right now. Two things, legislating and voting. That changes history and it scales. These are a few things we all got to get behind, and this applies to everyone. Number one, end qualified immunity. It protects cops from lawsuits and holds them to a different set of standards than the rest of us. There's a bill in Congress right now. Make sure it gets traction. Harass your member of Congress. Call the landline. If you can make bots for a Jordan drop, make bots that will call your member of Congress. Next, demilitarize the police. We saw this 2 months ago. Doctors are waddling around in garbage bags, but now our cops are LARPing like Master Chief in Halo? No. 3, this is very important. Vote out corrupt local officials, because this buddy-buddy bullshit between prosecutors, DAs, and the cops is the reason that police officers never serve time. You have to Google when the election is, vote locally, and get new officials into the system. That's on all of us. Number 4, this isn't for everyone. This is for Keith Ellison. Keith, I know you are watching. You are the Attorney General in Minnesota, and you have this case now. Come on, man. How many Muslim fundraisers have you and I gone to where we pray for the community? We gotta make dua. We cannot just make dua. You need to charge and prosecute all 4 officers as hard as you possibly can. They have got to go to prison. We can't let this moment slip away. Millions of people around the world have taken to the street to afford us this moment. Set the precedent so the next time a cop has his knee on a Black man's neck, he will see it for what it is. Murder. We can't let this moment slip away. Millions of people around the world.
All right. So, Lynn, we just watched, this video, and he's really like asking us to step in and speaking specifically to the Asian community. What are your thoughts after, sort of seeing this again 3 weeks later?
It is a call again to step up and to do your own inner, whatever you need to do to show up, which is, I think, the primary muscle that Asian Americans don't know how to, use. But that this isn't somebody else's story, that we're absolutely in it too. And for those Asian Americans that are going, what can I do? I think there are, he says a lot of creative things that we're like, oh, wow. Like that's so true. Where are, all of the brainiacs or the engineers or, all the Asian skills needed in this movement? Or just even continue having this conversation with your loved ones, create that safe space where they can say, oh, maybe it is, safe enough. And they take that, step towards courage and boldness. I think it starts there.
Beautiful. I love that. And, Lynn, I think we're going to wind up, wrap up the show now. But the bottom line is that I think all of what you're saying is true. Like if you're a chef, if you have a restaurant, cook and help with the protesters down at City Hall. If you're a, donate food. If you're a app developer, maybe you can develop an app or, lend your expertise to Black Lives Matter. If you're, that there are ways to do it that aren't quote unquote obvious. Like if you're a doctor and you have money, then donate to these fundraisers if you have a good income or something, right? Like that there's all different kinds of ways that things can be done so that it respects sort of the cultural like challenges around like, I don't want to be so obvious, but that it also does sort of take away the blinders to say, but that doesn't mean I can't act in any way. I can still act. I don't have to be like loud about it necessarily if that's not for me, but there are other ways that I can do it that are also in solidarity and lean in. Beautiful. And again, I'll just want to leave it with on my website, maximayclarity.com/resources. There are all kinds of classes that you can take, like Patty Dye's racism course. There's a anti-racism course, obviously. There's also the White Awake course. There's the People's Institute. There's the Racial Equity Institute. There are the Center for the Study of White American Culture has classes. The White Ally Toolkit has classes. There's just a lot that there's just a lot of different opportunities for people of all identities to be able to learn more about the history of what it is that we're here as inheritors of, immigrant or not, in America, so that we can learn to lean into the solidarity for Black and Indigenous folks here in the United States anyway, and hopefully see our common humanity in the world in a different embodied way.
That's right.
All right, Lynn Min, any final words from you? Thoughts, feelings?
Lean into the discomfort, choose the vulnerability. First, primarily for you, for your family, and then for humanity. I think it's that order, but please do it.
Awesome. All right, Lynn, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Inside Out. I'm Francesca Maximé for Francesca Maximé and NATASHA Stovall, who will be back next week. And Brian Wesley Johnson, our fearless producer. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please share with your friends. Let us know what you think in the comments and whatnot. And this will be available for replay on YouTube and on Facebook and all the Solivity Live channels. So thank you so much. Have a great day. And we'll see you next week at noon on Wednesday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Inside Out with Natasha and Francesca here on Solivity TV every Wednesday at noon. Solivity Magazine brings you the best in inspiration on Solivity TV. Check out our new shows. Mark your calendars for Solivity Magazine shows by going to solivity.com now.
Ask for Candy is partnering with Solivity Magazine, which means we're back live on Facebook, YouTube, and maybe even Instagram, wherever you get your video podcasts. Join us every Wednesday night live at 7 o'clock for some juicy conversations.